Coming up on Arirang News, North Korea and the U.S. are expected to start talking denuclearization again later this month. Experts are saying there is a way forward that'll involve cooperation between the two Koreas, a new approach by the U.S., and potentially sanctions relief. The OECD lowers its estimate for South Korea's economic growth this year again. Just 2.1% is the figure now. Growth around the world looking weaker too. And the South Korean government will be reconsidering the special treatment it gives to developing countries in trade. Apparently, these benefits are raising questions at the World Trade Organization. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Earlier this month, South Korea was hit by Typhoon Ling. 3 people died in that storm and more than 20 were injured, not to mention all the property damage. Now Korea is bracing for another typhoon. Our Jong-un has the latest.
Typhoon Tapah is heading towards the Korean peninsula. It was reported on Thursday evening that the typhoon is near Okinawa, Japan, and is expected to reach Jeju Island early on Sunday morning. The Korean Meteorological Administration forecasts Typhoon Tapah to then pass over the southern city of Tongyang before advancing fast towards Dokdo Island and the East Sea. Tapah is predicted to gain force as it passes through a warm stretch of ocean. The indirect impact of the typhoon will begin from Saturday as Jeju Island will start to see some rainfall. The rain will expand to southern Korean provinces, impacting even southern Gangwon-do province on the same day. The downpours are likely to spread across the rest of the country, including Seoul, on Sunday and will continue till Monday. The rainfall will get stronger from Sunday, where 30 to 50 millimeters per hour is expected to pour down on the southern coast. Wind speed of 110 to 145 kilometers per hour are expected in Jeju Island and near the south coast, but the winds won't be as strong as Typhoon Ling. High waves along coastal areas could cause damage, and residents in those areas are advised to be prepared for some flooding as well. Jong-un, Arirang News.
South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-wha toured 2 U.S. military bases in South Korea today, Camp Humphreys and Osan Airbase. The Foreign Ministry says Kang had wanted to visit the bases sooner to encourage the troops there, but she hadn't had the chance until now. She was also to meet with U.S. Forces Korea Commander Robert Abrams, with whom she was expected to reaffirm their country's strong alliance and emphasize the need for close coordination for peace and denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. They were also expected to touch upon the upcoming negotiations over the defense cost-sharing deal for next year. Going with Kang was the U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Harry Harris. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reportedly replied to a message he got earlier this month from Chinese President Xi Jinping, congratulating North Korea on the 71st anniversary of its founding. In his reply, according to the North's state media, Kim mentioned the summits he's had with Xi, saying the leaders were able to show the world their determination to strengthen their country's friendship, something he called a strategic choice. Kim also expressed gratitude for the support of the Chinese ruling party and the government. That Kim sent the message is seen as a way for the North to demonstrate its strong ties with its ally, China. The U.S. and North Korea, it seems, are getting ready to restart their talks relatively soon. President Trump is suggesting that his side is looking at what he referred to as a new method in approaching the talks, which sounds a lot like what the North has long been demanding. Our Lee Kyung-wha reports.
Speaking to reporters upon his arrival in Washington on Thursday, South Korea's top nuclear envoy Lee Do-hun said there has been a shift in what North Korea may demand during its upcoming talks with the United States. While sanctions relief was once the core focus of Pyongyang's demands, it has shifted that priority to getting a solid security guarantee from the United States.
Recently, North Korea's focus has shifted from alleviating sanctions to getting a security guarantee. So together with the U.S., we're discussing various issues.
He added that he expects the working-level talks to resume soon, citing recent statements from the North.
In September, the regime's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee mentioned their willingness to return to talks. Thus, they are likely to happen soon.
Meanwhile, speaking to reporters on Wednesday, President Trump suggested a new method of focusing on a security guarantee could help break the impasse in the denuclearization negotiations. The remarks came as he criticized his former national security advisor, John Bolton, for advocating the Libyan model in talks with the North. The Libya model calls for North Korea to unilaterally dismantle its nuclear weapons program before receiving any concessions, which Pyongyang viewed as a threat to topple the regime. Denuclearization talks are expected to resume later this month, although nothing has been scheduled yet. Pyongyang earlier demanded the U.S. come up with a new calculation method and renewed calls for security guarantees and sanctions relief. Lee Kyung-un, Arirang News.
Now, when it comes to the two Koreas themselves, it's been about a year since they sat down for historic talks that led to big promises, like joint economic projects. Those promises have yielded little so far, but as our Hong Yoo reports, it's widely hoped that peaceful ties will eventually lead to progress.
It was when the two Koreas held a groundbreaking ceremony to link and modernize their railways and roads that Inter-Korean Economic Cooperation took a big step forward after the September 19th Pyongyang Joint Declaration. South Korea hoped that connecting their railways and roads would bring peace and prosperity to Northeast Asia and expand its economic reach into the Asian continent. But the next step was impeded by the failure of the Hanoi summit between North Korea and the U.S. because building transport links would have to go in tandem with North Korea's denuclearization. Since then, there has been no progress on any of the two Koreas' main projects: the transport links, reopening the Inter-Korean factory park at Kaesong, or tours to North Korea's Mount Kumgangsan. But experts say there are ways to get things going.
So once North Korea dismantles Yongbyon facility, and then I believe they will be, each side of bargaining partner will be able to gain some kind of certain level of trust to each other. And then after that, the United States and the international community, including South Korea, will be able to release some part, not all, of the sanctions against North Korea. At that stage of the bargaining of the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, then they will be able to aim at more ambitious goals in the future.
And such ambitious goals can be achieved through the peace economy, a key policy goal of the Moon Jae-in administration. Officials in the government say peace and prosperity form a virtuous circle, each reinforcing the other.
Instability in terms of peace hurts the overall economy in areas such as industry and capital markets. So economic prosperity can be maximized if it's based on peace. The same goes the other way around. When we have achieved high level of economic cooperation and have built a common understanding, this is what requires the two sides to contain any conflict. So it serves as an opportunity to consolidate peace.
To build lasting peace, the Unification Ministry will continue to review the information shared with North Korea regarding their economic cooperation to find ways to make progress. Hong Yoo, Arirang News.
And with the North Korea-U.S. talks expected to start again soon, a renowned nuclear scientist says cooperation is the key when it comes to dealing with North Korea and the denuclearization process. Our Oh Soo-young sat down with Dr. Siegfried Hecker for an Arirang News exclusive.
Boosting inter-Korean cooperation through a tailored sanctions relief could break the impasse on denuclearization. That's according to Siegfried Hecker, a nuclear scientist at Stanford University who has been to North Korea 7 times since 2004.
Tailored sanctions relief, I call them tailored to encourage North-South interaction. Not necessarily to drop all UN sanctions, but you could encourage, through tailored sanctions relief, North and South cooperation. And so some economic benefits, economic traction, with reducing the risk on the nuclear side with real steps and rolling back. That's what's going to develop the trust to hopefully, get to the end point of the elimination of nuclear weapons.
Hecker's research indicates that while the North has substantially reduced its nuclear activities compared to 2017, the regime has continued producing fissile material at Yeonbyeong complex. He estimates it has enough bomb fuel to produce around 40 nuclear weapons.
Earlier this year, North Korea offered to dismantle its Yeonbyeong nuclear complex, which critics have said simply isn't enough. But you've been to Yeonbyeong complex 4 times since 2004, and you've said that it would actually be a significant step. So should this be something that the United States reconsiders, perhaps?
That's exactly where I would go back to, is to see what can be done as far as Yeonbyeong, and particularly to take those facilities that have the direct weapons relevance and start to roll those back. It's not the whole nuclear weapons program, but all the plutonium, all the tritium is made in Yeonbyeong, and shutting that down, eliminating that capability is a big deal. We should go there.
You said in your report that it may take about 10 years for North Korea to fully denuclearize. Well, what are some ways that they could speed up the process?
So what I had proposed is, why don't we see if we engage the North Korea in what I call cooperative conversion of its nuclear program. In other words, suppose you could actually get the North Koreans to work with you to say, well, there's some parts of perhaps the nuclear enterprise that could be retained that is strictly civilian. Perhaps instead of missile tests, the North Koreans could actually have peaceful space launches. You know, perhaps those could actually be done cooperatively with South Korea. Now, once you get the spirit of cooperation, then verification becomes much easier, and you could actually shrink that timeline. But to take those steps towards cooperative takes risk.
Given the high level of distrust between the North and the US, Hecker advocates a phased approach to denuclearization through a halt, rollback, and finally elimination. Sooyoung, Arirang News.
The OECD has again cut this year's growth outlook for South Korea, the 3rd time it's done so since March. And it also said the global economy might slow down to a level not seen since the financial crisis a decade ago. Kim Mo-kyun has the details.
The OECD has lowered its 2019 growth forecast for the South Korean economy to 2.1%, down 0.3 percentage points compared to its earlier estimate in May. The OECD's interim economic outlook report for September said the South Korean economy will grow at a slower pace than its previous forecast of 2.4%, citing persistent weak global trade and soft import demand in China. However, the OECD forecasts the South Korean economy to grow 2.3% in 2020, faster than this year, saying the government's recent efforts on macroeconomic policies could lead to increased domestic demand. The latest downward revision comes amid concerns over slowing exports caused by the ongoing US-China trade war and the trade row between South Korea and Japan. However, the South Korean government stressed that the OECD forecast is relatively good compared to other member states with similar-sized economies to South Korea. The OECD also cut its growth outlook for the world economy for this year and next year to 2.9% and 3% respectively. Each were downwardly revised by at least 0.3 percentage points from its May forecast. The OECD pointed out that such figures would be the weakest annual growth rates since the global financial crisis in 2009. The report cited trade policy tensions as a major factor for the cuts and stressed the need for collective efforts to stop the buildup of trade-distorting tariffs and to restore a transparent, rules-based system that encourages businesses to invest. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
South Korea's Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi is suggesting that Seoul should reconsider the preferential trade treatment it gives to some developing countries, because the fact that it doesn't give others the same benefits is raising questions at the World Trade Organization. This is the first time he's raised the possibility of changing that arrangement. Hong said the government will put South Korea's national interest first, analyzing internal and external trends and the effect such a change could have on the local economy. He insisted any change would not affect deals already in place, but would shape decisions on future deals. Japan is feeling the blowback from its unprecedented trade curbs on South Korea, according to data from Seoul's trade ministry. After Japan imposed its first round of trade controls in early July, South Korea's imports of Japanese semiconductor equipment have plunged by more than 32.5%. Japan's overall exports to South Korea also dropped by 6.9% in July and more than 8% in August. The measures have also hit Japan's tourism industry. Japan's National Tourism Organization says just 309,000 South Koreans visited Japan in August, a drop of 48% compared to the same month last year. It's time now on this Friday for an in-depth look at the markets this past week, and for that I'm joined by Dr. Song Sooyoung, professor of business at Jung-un University. Dr. Song, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, nice meeting you, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, yesterday we saw the U.S. Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 25 basis points. Why did they do it? What does it mean? And how, in your view, is the American economy doing?
Yeah, basically the economic performance of United States far exceeds the average of other countries. Particularly, the unemployment rate remains low and strong, and the growth rate of the GDP is still very good, and the job creation is still records positive numbers. However, the trend is change, I think. I believe that particularly the fixed investment among the business or corporations has been declining. And also, what is always important is the surrounding economic environment, particularly in the European countries, and China has dragged and put the pressure on the U.S. economic environment, surrounding environment. Therefore, that's why the Federal Reserve decided to reduce the 25 basis point. Particularly, the uncertainty is still lingering, and the outside external environment is very bad. So this turns out to be like some kind of preparation for the future declining economic growth rate. So to that regard, I believe this is a proper way for the Fed to be prepared for to reduce the declining speed of the U.S. economy.
Got it. Very interesting. Well, now we get to see whether the Bank of Korea is going to follow suit and cut rates next month. How likely do you think that is, a rate cut, and how much might they cut by?
Yeah, recently I read the news that the chairman of Bank of Korea was relieved because of the reduction of U.S. federal funds rate. Because even though U.S. economy is stronger and show higher growth rate than us, then the problem is they have retained a little bit higher interest rate than us. However, but economic situation in Korea is we have seen the development of declining inflation particularly. So to that regard, I believe when the federal funds rate is reduced for the preparation, then Bank of Korea, I urge them, the Bank of Korea, to consider another 25 basis point reduction in the prime rate for basic rate for Korea, because the inflation is declining, which means that the real interest rate is getting larger, because when nominal rate remains constant. Therefore, to that regard, I think in order to relieve a little more burden out of the people or economy, I think in October it's better for. We are going to better off when the Bank of Korea consider the reduction of the basic interest rate.
Well, now, in another story, it's been about 3 weeks since Japan took Korea off its whitelist of trusted trading partners. How has this, in practice, changed trade between the two sides, and what damage do you think it'll do to Japan in particular?
Yeah, I heard that particularly the export from Japan to Korea has been reduced greatly. But, however, in comparison to the economic size of the Japan, mainly domestic demand in Japan prevails over the trade. However, our economy depends more on the trade. Then the problem is recently, as you know, as you have seen that the OECD interim outlook has been changed a lot, but I'm very interested in they have increased the projection for the economic growth rate of Japan is positive by 0.3 percentage point. So I wonder why they do that, because even though Japan has low unemployment rate and relatively economic performance is good, however, Japan has, particular Bank of Japan has determined to retain the quantitative easing and very low interest rate policy. And in addition to that, the Abe administration has been determined to retain the expansionary fiscal policy despite some potential negative effect from the consumption taxation increase in the upcoming October. So that's why OECD has been increased some prospect for the Japan. However, I think there would be some kind of political reason, because OECD outlook still retains a 0.6 percentage growth rate in 2020. So which means they have just adjusted the upcoming year growth rate, and then still maintain the old project for the 2020 growth rate of Japan. So that implies this would be a very temporary, or maybe behind the story there would be some kind of political, some kind of cosmetics.
Yeah, that's
very
interesting point there, and the mirror image of the growth projections. All right, Dr. Song, it's great to have you on today. That's where we'll have to leave it, though. We appreciate your insights.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, the U.S. and China started a new round of trade talks on Thursday at the working level for the first time in nearly 2 months. The negotiations, set to continue into Friday, aim to lay the groundwork for high-level talks scheduled for early October. Reports say this week's talks are likely to focus heavily on agriculture, including U.S. demands that China import substantially more American soybeans and other farm commodities. Huawei has unveiled its new flagship smartphone series, the Mate 30. But because of U.S. sanctions, the new smartphone comes without Google apps. And without those apps, industry experts wonder whether the new phones can appeal to buyers outside of China. Our Ji-young has more.
At a glitzy launch in the German city of Munich on Thursday local time, Huawei said its latest Mate 30 Pro and Mate 30 devices have a sleek design, cameras, and screens that are better than the latest Apple iPhone.
This is the Huawei Mate 30 Pro, the world's first smartphone with dedicated 14-megapixel cine camera, which can help you take a 4K video 60 frames per second, and also with HDR plus support, and also support time-lapse.
The CEO also stressed that the lineup is a 5G flagship smartphone. But as Huawei faces the fallout from its blacklisting by the US earlier this year, its new phones do not feature popular Google-licensed apps such as Chrome, YouTube, or Gmail, which limits their appeal to consumers. Also lacking is Google Play Store, which is the major way users outside China access Android apps. Because of the restrictions imposed by the U.S. on the Chinese firm due to the trade dispute and security issues between the two countries, Huawei could not license the latest version of Android. To address this issue, the Chinese tech giant has come up with its own alternative apps using an open-source version of Google's Android operating system. And Huawei says its all-in-one 5G processor, dubbed Kirin 990, is the most sophisticated smartphone chipset launched to date.
It's the world's first 5G SoC, the revolutionary 5G SoC here. It's a Kirin 990. It's so small, tiny size. It's smaller than my nail size.
However, industry watchers doubt whether Huawei can power through the trade war and appeal to customers outside of China, and whether their Mate 30 phones are truly free of U.S. technology.
So even though Huawei has designed this processor themselves from the ground up, it's using patents from global companies like ARM, who's a UK-based company. But they've actually used a little bit of US patent technology inside of theirs, which is why the Kirin is now in jeopardy.
Market watchers say that access to Google apps will make it harder for Huawei to compete in the mobile phone market, but the Chinese tech giant is pushing ahead regardless and will launch a foldable smartphone next month. Ji-young, Arirang News.
Hyundai Motor America held a charity event in Washington on Thursday to raise money for children in treatment for cancer. Hyundai Hope on Wheels is one of the biggest funders of pediatric cancer treatment in the United States, raising nearly $160 million since its launch in 1998. It's provided over $13 million to 52 different cancer researchers so far just this September, which in the U.S. is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.